Tel Aviv. In a charged briefing delivered with unmistakable conviction, Israel's leadership defended its recent military actions by drawing parallels to one of the most defining moments in modern history, the September 11th, 2001 attacks in the United States. The tone was not merely defensive, it was assertive, aiming to position Israel's actions within the broader framework of international law, historical precedent, and the fight against terrorism. The speaker began by reminding the audience of a crucial international resolution adopted in the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. He said, "There's a Security Council resolution. I think it's 1373. It was adopted about 2 weeks after September 11th. The framing was deliberate. Resolution 1373, passed by the UN Security Council in late September 2001, required member states to deny safe haven, support, or resources to terrorists. By evoking this resolution, the argument sought to demonstrate that Israel's actions were not unique, but rather consistent with international expectations established nearly a quarter century ago. The reference set the stage for a broader comparison that the same principles which guided the US in its response to al-Qaeda should apply equally to Israel in its campaign against Hamas. The speaker then drew a direct line between America's post-9/11 policies and Israel's current decisions. He said, "On September 11th, the United States said, 'We will hunt down these terrorists wherever they are.' And 2 weeks later, the Security Council says that states must not harbor terrorists, give them shelter, finance them, or in any way allow them to work from their territory against other states." The point was sharpened with historical examples. America's military campaigns in Afghanistan and Pakistan were framed as natural extensions of Resolution 1373 and the declared right of states to defend themselves against groups operating beyond their borders. He said, "Based on that resolution and on the American policy, the United States bombed Afghanistan because that's where al-Qaeda was, and then they bombed Pakistan because that's where bin Laden was." The emphasis was unmistakable. If the US could act decisively across sovereign borders in the name of counterterrorism, then Israel too should be judged by the same standard. The speech then pivoted to address one of the most common criticisms levelled at Israel, alleged violations of sovereignty. With forceful cadence, the argument dismissed such critiques as hypocritical. He said, "Now nobody said, 'My God, a terrible thing happened.' America violated the sovereignty of Afghanistan, or America violated the sovereignty of Pakistan. Don't harbor terrorists. Nobody will have to act on your territory." The message was clear. Sovereignty cannot serve as a shield for terrorism. If states provide shelter to groups like Hamas, they forfeit the protections normally afforded by international law. The address continued by framing Israel's military operations as an exercise of rights guaranteed by international law. He said, "But it's our right, our internationally recognized right of states, to act against terrorists who operate, who attack them from other states. This is what we did, by linking Israel's strikes to a principle embedded within the international system." The speaker reinforced the narrative that these were not rogue or unilateral decisions, but rather measures consistent with long-standing norms. The tone hardened when addressing the wave of international condemnations aimed at Israel. This, perhaps, was the most impassioned segment of the statement. He said, "And the hypocrisy of those who condemn Israel is just so obvious. They shouldn't condemn Israel. They should commend Israel for going against the Hamas terrorists, who not only endanger us, but endanger all of them." The use of the word commend was deliberate. Instead of merely tolerating or excusing Israel's actions, the international community was urged to actively recognize them as part of the global struggle against extremism. To further support this position, the statement pointed out that many of the same countries criticizing Israel had already outlawed organizations linked to Hamas, such as the Muslim Brotherhood. He said, "And most of them have already outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood. So I don't buy the hypocrisy, and I don't buy the condemnations." The charge of double standards, where Western and regional governments condemn Israel publicly but act similarly in their own security contexts, was a recurring undertone. As the address neared its conclusion, the speaker acknowledged that the operational results of the strike were still under review. Yet, even with the lack of full clarity, the decision was defended as justified and necessary. He said, As far as the results, we're still checking it out. It hasn't been. It's not yet fully conclusive. We're waiting to see it. But one result I can say is obvious, and we considered it when I authorized this. The emphasis on personal authorization added a layer of political responsibility. It underlined that this was not a bureaucratic or military decision made in isolation, but a calculated call at the highest level of leadership. The speech ended on a brief note of encouragement, suggesting a measure of confidence in the path taken. He said, "Good job. Good job." The remarks reflect a larger pattern of Israeli political communication, rooting its controversial military actions within globally accepted precedents and appealing to shared international experiences, especially the United States' war on terror. By invoking UN Resolution 1373 and referencing America's actions in Afghanistan and Pakistan, the leadership sought to insulate Israel from accusations of illegality or disproportionate force. The subtext was clear. If these actions were legitimate for the United States, the world's most powerful democracy, then they must also be legitimate for Israel. Moreover, the rhetorical move to highlight hypocrisy reflects a long-standing frustration with international diplomacy. Israel has often argued that it is held to a different standard than other nations, a view reinforced in this speech. The address carries implications beyond immediate military justification. By casting Hamas as part of the same global terrorist threat once represented by al-Qaeda, Israel aims to shift the framing of its conflict from a regional dispute to part of a universal struggle. This alignment with post-9/11 counterterrorism logic serves multiple purposes. Legitimacy in international law. By tying actions to UN resolutions, Israel strengthens its claim of operating within global rules. Political solidarity with the US. By invoking Washington's past, Israel reinforces its role as a partner in the same fight. Moral framing. By condemning hypocrisy, Israel attempts to morally reposition itself as a frontline defender of values shared by much of the international community. The speech was more than a defense of a single military strike. It was a broader attempt to redefine the narrative surrounding Israel's use of force. By positioning itself as consistent with international law, aligned with American precedent, and morally justified against terrorism, Israel's leadership delivered a clear message: condemnations are misplaced and recognition is overdue. At its core, the address challenged the world to reconsider the framework through which Israel's military actions are judged, not as unilateral aggression, but as part of a shared global responsibility to confront terror.